Welcome to the Menopause and Cancer podcast, where we speak with cancer patients, survivors, and incredible experts in their fields to help us find solutions to our symptoms and ideas to improve our health. My name is Danny Binnington. Welcome to today's most practical episode, where we'll be diving into one of the most common and confusing questions for those navigating menopause after cancer. How should I be eating? What should I be eating? And can diet help ease my menopausal symptoms? I personally know from navigating cancer and being a cancer survivor for over 10 years, how confusing it can be to understand what works best for you and your body, especially after cancer treatment and when you might be having so many menopausal symptoms. And that's why I'm thrilled to bring you this incredible workshop featuring Julie Webb, a leading nutritionist and expert in menopause and cancer nutrition. Julie will be answering questions like, can diet help improve menopausal symptoms like anxiety, hot flushes, fatigue, mood swings, joint ache? Is there a best menopause diet? What does it look like on my plate? We want to make it really practical. How should I be eating to support my bone health? All of these questions we will answer. I'm also bringing you a whole group of the women in our community so that you can learn from their questions, because I think that is absolutely key to you knowing that you're not alone with everything that you're going through. Make sure you listen to the end. There are people that tell us that they have followed Julie's advice and they feel so much better than even before cancer. This has been amazing to receive testimonials from people who have come to our workshops before. I love sharing those positive stories with everyone. So grab your notepad and paper or your favorite cup of tea and let's get started. Thank you for your time today, Julie. How are you?
I'm very, very well, thank you. Yeah, nice to be here with you all.
Julie, we have so many conversations, don't we, about the impact of food on our bodies after cancer treatment played havoc, and also when menopause muddles its way in. When people come and see you, what do they tell you that's going on for them? At what stage do you receive them? What do they worry about? What are their concerns?
I get people at every stage of the journey. And the main problem people come to me is fatigue. And I'd say joint place with that is overwhelm and confusion. So have all these symptoms, predominantly fatigue, and I'm going to say the aching, general aching, lethargy, and the hot flushes, obviously. They're the main sort of symptoms people come with. You can't imagine ever feeling normal again. But at the same time, when you start looking into what do I do with my diet, it just is so much information. It's so overwhelming. It's confusing. And it's such an emotive subject. Everyone's got an opinion and we're all very defensive at the same time. And so it just becomes so hard to make changes, because partly because you're not sure what you're really supposed to do, and partly because we're already overwhelmed. And so
we're going to really break that down today. Let's see if what you are experiencing in your clinic is what we're having here today. So I'm going to just quickly launch a poll. Do you think that diet after cancer is a confusing topic for you, especially with menopausal symptoms? Just have a little look and give us your answers. So we've just got yes, no, or so-so. Some people might think diet is confusing, but not massively. And for some people, it's a really emotive and confusing subject. I'm going to wait for your poll results, and then I'm going to ask you at home here today what you think diet can help you with, because I think a lot of you come with a whole suitcase full of symptoms, and dare I say you don't think that diet can help improve all of those symptoms, but you might hope that diet can help you with some. So I'm just going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results with everyone. So 71% actually today said that diet is a really confusing topic. Only 3% said no, and 26% said so-so. So that's really good to know. So whilst Julie and I talk, do use the chat function now and tell us what you were hoping that diet could help you with. So Julie said people come with anxiety, all over aches, fatigue. What is it that you're experiencing at home? The chat goes to me and then I can read it out. So just use that. Some of you haven't got their cameras on. Thank you for letting me know. That's absolutely fine. Cameras off for now. We can turn them back on later. Um, so, Julie, just to sort of set the scene, when people come with these symptoms and they're coming to you as a nutritionist and they're hoping for you to help them, is the question, can a change in my diet help me with these menopausal symptoms? Yes or no? What would your answer be?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And that's not over-promising. A change in diet can absolutely help you.
Okay. So we have here today, who has joined us today, low mood and mood swings. So there's a difference there. Bones, bone density, joint aches, and sleep. Again, more energy, improving my mental well-being, and a reduction of hot flushes, people are hoping. Joint pains and night sweats. Brain fog, hot flushes. So, an array of symptoms and very much echoing what you experience. More energy, evening out the peaks and troughs, the low mood, also the bone health, and yes, joint ache, Karen says. So, if you think a diet can really help from your experience with many of these symptoms, is there a best diet for when you are in menopause after your cancer treatment?
Yes, absolutely. And I think what's easy and exciting is that it's the same diet regardless of the symptoms. So whilst
Okay.
nutrition has become very individually focused, the focus is more about how to help that person make sure they're absorbing properly and help them find their way. But actually, when we look at the root cause of the symptoms, obviously the root cause is the decline in estrogen. But what we then have to say is, what's the knock-on effect of that decline in estrogen? Now, for you, you're experiencing it as symptoms, whether it's aches and pains, whether it's low mood, whether it's IBS, it can be one or two of those symptoms for you. It might be all of them. But the root cause is very sort of similar for all of us.
Mm.
And so then what that means is it's the same diet, more or less, for all the different symptoms, because the root cause, it's estrogen, but then it's what does that do? So one of the big things about estrogen, it acts as anti-inflammatory. So actually what we're experiencing is much higher levels of inflammation and less insulin sensitivity. So once you start thinking in terms of what can I do for those two things, rather than what can I do to make up for my lack of estrogen, which you don't want to do, you're kind of like, well, how can I mop up what estrogen was doing for me in terms of being anti-inflammatory? When you start seeing your diet as needing to be anti-inflammatory, it becomes a bit easier because you don't become so fearful. It's more about, what do I need to give this body of mine? What can I feed it each day to keep mopping up that inflammation? And I think sometimes it's much easier to have a single focus so that you're not thinking, I need this for that and that for that. It's kind of like, my diet needs to be anti-inflammatory. And I think we all have an
Mm.
idea about that. Often people say, I want to be anti-inflammatory, but I don't think we quite know how to do it and what that actually involves.
Mm. And that's so helpful. I think more than 10 years ago, or 8 years ago, when I went to see my first menopause specialist on the NHS, I went in with a very long list of foods that I thought had phytoestrogenic effects. And I was hoping for him to say, yes, if you eat all of those foods, Danny, then you will put enough estrogen back into your body so that you'll feel well. But that was I was missing the point so much. And I want to share it because I want people to sort of relate to how wrong we can go sometimes. So the whole focus, and what I love so much about your work is, yes, it's the lack of estrogen that so many of us experience and that plays havoc alongside some of the medications you guys at home might be on, such as aromatase inhibitors or tamoxifen. But when we're being clever, it's the effect of what that low estrogen does to us. If we combat the effect, it's much more effective, right? Than thinking we need to all we need to do to focus so much in this world is we just need to go give estrogen back and then we're all okay. Well, there are other ways around it.
And because for many of you, that's the last thing you would want to do. And that's what is
Right.
causing so much of the fear. Because
Yeah.
actually, if you look at if you were to do a Google search, which foods raise estrogen, you'd come up with quite a list. It's obviously
Mm.
starts at the obvious soy and flax, but actually, it comes up with many foods, and then you start being frightened of what to eat. I think
Yeah.
once you know that you won't replace your estrogen with food, and that's
Yeah.
not what you need to do and not what you probably want to do.
Yeah. And I want to talk about phytoestrogens a little bit more in a moment, because you and I have just written a great article on phytoestrogens in food over the Christmas holidays. So we will answer that if you have questions at home. But before, I want Julie to tell us about the trifle lady. And then we're going to go and answer some other questions and more detail. So, Julie, we went to Yorkshire together and you hosted the workshop at Maggie's at one of our menopause and cancer days. Can you quickly explain trifle lady and also the success you had with her? Tell us.
And actually, I'm grinning from ear to ear because I've just had a follow-up with Trifle Lady this
Oh,
morning.
did you?
She
Oh,
doesn't mind being
lovely.
called Trifle Lady. She's very happy. And she is literally a different person. So Trifle Lady um, was she was at the extreme end of diet. So obviously you're all going to be in very different places with your diet. And often people say, my diet's quite good. She was very much like, my diet is awful. It is full of sugar. But what she was doing was she was very much focusing on, I can't have this. I've got to not eat because I've put on weight. I mustn't have this, mustn't have that. But then by the end of the day, she was so stressed out and so hungry because she had really not nourished herself. By the end of the day, she was getting in the car, driving to the local garage, with the supermarket, and she was buying a trifle for 4, and she was eating that trifle every night. And she hadn't slept for over a year. She was feeling dreadful, absolutely dreadful. Every menopause symptom going. And she entertained us all, didn't she, that day?
Yeah.
Anyway, she came to work with me one-to-one, and she went. I'm going to say she gave it 100% to the diet. So I'm very much don't overwhelm yourself more. Start gently if you need to, but some people want to give it 100%. Some people like the overhaul approach, and for her that worked because the benefits were immediate, absolutely immediate. She thought she wouldn't feel better till she lost enough weight. But what the thing with inflammation is, and the joint pain, we think it's due to carrying the excess weight. And obviously that does play a role, but actually it's the inflammation from the diet that helps you to gain weight. So once you change the diet, the effects are pretty quick, way before you lose the weight that you might want to lose. So she started feeling better in her body, in her aches and pains, which she loved because she's a huge exerciser, and she had always exercised anyway. She started sleeping just through the night, and she also started going to bed knowing she was going to sleep through the night. The hot flushes decreased, consider she still has some hot flushes. That is now her only menopause symptom. But she says she's aware of them, but she doesn't get irritated with them anymore. She just is aware of them. She might take a jumper off, and that's it. But the mood for her was quite severe, and that's gone now. She said to me this morning, she has never ever felt this well her whole life, and she's entering now 2025. She said with this whole new lease of life. She's so happy. It's amazing. So
That's amazing.
she was extreme. She did everything I would suggest that you're aiming towards. She did it overnight. So she increased her fruits and vegetables considerably. She reduced sugar consumption. She went for the sort of all or nothing approach, which you don't have to do. But what she has now noticed is, even when her diet is still really good, when she starts to have the sugar back in, which she did over Christmas, she said instantly she's not sleeping as well. And she's not feeling like she knows she can feel.
Okay. I want to know now, and like at home, I'm sure everyone will want to know exactly what is this special menopause diet. But before I ask you and you explain that, I want to really differentiate for people when we talk with Julie now about this perfect menopause diet for a cancer survivor. There are other resources as well. So if you have, for example, worries about what can or can't you have, after cancer? What foods maybe cause cancer? Are there triggering foods like red meat for you, or processed meat, or alcohol? What's the deal? We will share with you the World Cancer Research Fund recommendations, so you can read those. We're going to focus very much on the menopausal symptoms in today's conversation, because I think for us cancer survivors, it's very easy to muddle this up. For years, I didn't know why I wanted to change my diet. I think in the early years, it was very much because I thought if I exclude all of those food groups, I have a better chance of keeping my cancer at bay. That was definitely my driving factor. Whereas now it's definitely how could I eat to feel better? So it's a very different, and I know the diets aren't very different, but we want to differentiate them because you're very passionate about getting it right. And what you're also so passionate about in saying is that everyone eats very differently. We have different starting points. What are we aiming for, though, Julie? We're all coming from different ways. So some of us might be Trial Lady similar. Some of us might think, actually, I've got a very good diet. What are we all aiming towards? What's that great menopause diet?
Okay, so to make it really simple, I would say that in an ideal world, when you get into bed of an evening, if you were to do a quick audit of what you've eaten that day, because you can do it in your own different ways. I would suggest a way, but because we're all very different, and that's fine. But ideally, what you will have fed this body of yours is maybe 3 to 4 pieces of fruit. Okay, so just 3 individual items, and you are looking for not just 3 bananas, because we're always wanting diversity at the same time. So let's say it's 3 pieces of fruit. That's the first thing. And usually that's the first thing I get people to start on, because we all quite like fruit. We all think we're not allowed it because of the sugar, but in its whole form, that fruit is okay. Now, one of those fruit servings can be a juice. 150 milliliters would be the maximum, and that would be okay. So that might be that you put the 150 milliliters of juice with another 2 pieces of fruit, blend it. So that's quite an easy way of getting that in you. So you can do your fruit however you see fit, whether it's just at breakfast, whether it's one with each meal, or whether it's as a smoothie that you sip on, or it's up to you. So 3 pieces of fruit is the first thing. Next, which comes as a shock to many people, is 6 portions of vegetables. Okay, so that sounds a lot. It's 6 little palmfuls. So to be specific, a portion is 80 grams, which is not nearly as much as you might think. It is when it's something like rocket, it's probably the whole bag, because by the time you squish that up, it's smaller. But it's roughly 6 little palmfuls. So with broccoli, it'll be like 3 pieces of broccoli, but it's roughly a little palmful. Now, I think it's quite hard work to eat 6 in one go, so I would break it down and have 3 with my lunch. And that might be nothing more fancy than a carrot with a sandwich, plus 6 cherry tomatoes and a hunk of cucumber. You might want to make a big fancy salad, but you don't have to. Can it just be that that's what you nibble on while you're making your sandwich? But try if you can to get in that habit of having that vegetable at lunchtime and with your dinner. So whatever your dinner is, half that plate has 3 vegetables. Okay. And then the final it counts as a vegetable serving, but it is also protein, and it's so high in fiber. And that would be a sort of handful of beans. So whether it's kidney beans, chickpeas, butter beans, doesn't matter. Variety is really good there, and that's quite easy to get variety with the beans, because you can buy the different tins, they don't go off, and all the different lentils as well. So that makes up this, what we call the sort of, I know you've called it something different, I call it the cleansing half of the plate, because it's not many calories. So often when people say, oh my goodness, that's a huge amount, I would never eat all that in a day, I think it's nice to have that reassurance that it's under 400 calories. And bearing in mind, you're probably eating 1,800, 2,000. It's a lot of food in volume, but it's not very many calories. It won't fill you. It won't sustain you. It's hugely important, because that half of the plate is all of that is going to mop up the inflammation and the oxidative stress that is occurring just by living. So by having that amount, you are flooding the body with polyphenols, the antioxidants, the vitamins, the minerals, the fiber. Okay, so that's the most
Julie,
important thing to do.
This is more than our 5 a day. Where do these recommendations for 10? So when you add it all up, it's 10 servings of fruit and vegetables a day. Where do these recommendations come
Now,
from?
you know that my menopause brain is not very good at remembering the names of studies. So I'm going to give you the reference for that.
Lovely,
So the
lovely.
5 a day has absolutely no evidence behind it. It was made up. It was a marketing campaign to get us to eat more ready-made foods that had fruit and veg. There's no
Yeah,
evidence for 5 a day. So the
yeah.
evidence for 8 to 10 a day, actually the lower number for the
Mm,
cancer prevention is
mm,
600,
yeah,
but the higher number is for cardiovascular health.
yeah,
So I always go for the higher number because obviously cardiovascular health becomes more important post-treatment.
yeah,
Now,
yeah.
that number, the 3, 6, and the beans, there's no number to say that's the exact amount you need for your menopause symptoms.
Mm,
But that's the amount I get people eating, and that's where I see people having the benefits. And that's the hard
mm,
thing, because I'm sure you're all thinking, well, I do eat loads of fruits and veg, but actually, if you add up the amount, my daughter will tell you she had lettuce today, but it's like one
mm,
piece in a sandwich. So
yeah.
quantity it's the dose. It really, really does matter, because this is the half of the plate that is the most powerful for your symptoms, because it is going to mop up that oxidative stress.
It's also the recommendations on the World Cancer Research Fund, so on their 10 guidelines on how to live post cancer or how to prevent cancer, because the guidance is pretty much the same and all experts agree it's the same guidance. That's what they also recommend. I just wanted to bring in the 5 a day because we've sort of grown up with that, isn't it? And suddenly 10 a day seems, wow, that's a lot. What else is on that plate then?
So that's the cleansing half, but you need to feed yourself, because otherwise you're going to be hungry. If you're only having 400 calories a day, you're going to be starving. So you have to feed yourself with the 3 macronutrients, they're called. So the 3 main sort of food groups. The first one is a little palmful. I mean, it does vary according to how much exercise you do, whether you've got any weight to lose. It does vary, but roughly it's a palmful of the complex carbohydrates. So obviously that the fruits and the vegetables is also carbohydrate, as are the lentils and beans. But this is the complex, like potato, rice, pasta, bread, quinoa, oats. So you're looking at having roughly a palmful. You can play around with this amount. This is the only section of the plate that I say to people to cut back on if you are trying to reduce your caloric intake in order to lose some weight. But if you are struggling with your sleep, I don't take it away in the evening, because just having a small amount of the complex carbs there in the evening can help with sleep. Now, the thing with this section is there's 2 things to remember. Ideally, most of the time we're choosing unrefined and unprocessed. Yeah, so the browner and the more whole grain and messed about with, the better. So you're thinking about a nice stone ground sort of rye bread rather than a white processed bagel.
Mhm.
Sometimes we're going to have a croissant, because, what's life without a croissant? But it's what you do most of the time that matters. So most of the time, you're looking to have the best unprocessed version. And this is the bit of the plate where most of the processing comes in. So you need to just find the best bread that you can get. And just that's the one that you buy regularly, because you don't want to be reading labels all the time. But what also really matters here, and this is the hardest bit post-menopause, is portion size. So even if it's brown rice, you might not be able to eat as much as you used to, because post-menopause, you are less insulin sensitive. And what that means is the insulin that you produce in response to eating, in particular carbohydrates, doesn't do its job as well. So then you aren't dealing with sugar as well. So sometimes, sadly, we have to watch our portions when it comes to the complex carbs. But
Mhm.
what's nice is you filled out your plate with all the vegetables and the fruits anyway. I think if we don't eat that many fruits and vegetables and you reduce your carbs, your plate's looking a bit sad. But your
Yeah.
plate's going to be so colourful and interesting
Mm.
that
Mm.
you aren't relying on the potatoes or the chips, for example. So
Mhm.
it's some carbohydrates, good quality and not too much. Okay, so
And that is why people often say, I eat exactly the same as before, and now I just can't lose the weight, isn't it? And that
Yeah.
means we eat exactly the same, but our body does different things with it. And that's
Yeah.
really frustrating, isn't it,
It's
when that
very
happens?
frustrating, but I think if you can just accept that, and the
Mm,
thing is, you can play around. You can say, let's see what happens. It's not forever. I think sometimes the idea that we can never have something again is just feels very limiting. But if you just say, let's see what happens if I jiggle things about on my plate. Let's see how I feel. I think reducing carbs is really, induces a lot of fear for people. And they're like, well,
mm,
what will I eat? So
mm,
you must put in that cleansing half to make the
mm,
plate look nice.
mm,
So alongside your starch, what you want to make sure is you've got sufficient protein. Protein is the section of the plate that causes the most stress for people. And it's the sort of most controversial, I would say. So your protein options are red meat, within the guidelines. So, but the guidelines, when they say moderate, it's actually quite a large amount. So it's sort of 500 grams cooked a week, or 750 raw weight, 500 to 750 raw weight. So to me, I would go for the lower amount. So a packet of mince, for example, is 500 grams, and that serves four if I was making a bolognese or a chili or a shepherd's pie. So even if you had that 4 times a week, you are within the safe limits. And that's why the portion size matters, because it's not that you're just having red meat, you're also having all that fiber with it as well. So you can have red meat if you would like to, and that's quite important. If you're anemic, for example, it's a nice easy way to supply the iron, but you don't have to have it. It is not inflammatory. I think that's really important. People just think that red meat is just so bad for us. In those moderate amounts, with the rest of the plate, it is not inflammatory if you are within a safe weight range. Yeah, and
mhm,
the diet is balanced. So small amounts of red meat if you would like, chicken, turkey, pork, you've got fish, you've got eggs, you have got tofu. Soy is absolutely safe post-diagnosis. There is some evidence to say that soy products will help with menopause symptoms, but not really from a diet. That's in terms of a supplement at quite a high dose, which is not recommended post-menopause,
Some
certain
cancers.
yeah.
Mm,
So include it in the diet as a good source of protein. It's particularly important, obviously, if you're more plant-based. But it won't, on its own, it will not reduce your symptoms from the diet.
mm,
Um, so what's important with the protein is that we get enough. We don't need excess amounts, but we do need enough. So you need roughly 0.8 grams per kilo of body weight. So just in your calculator times 0.8 by your kilos. And that will give you the amount you need per day. And that's particularly important. I know Caroline will agree. That is particularly important to maintain your bone health and your muscle mass. Okay.
mm,
But what it can also do, and this is what happened with Trifle Lady, is when you increase your above that limit, it can really help to manage appetite and increase satiety. So I often go in with a higher amount in the morning whilst we're trying to rebalance your hormones. And when I say rebalance hormones, we're talking about those hunger hormones, so ghrelin and
mm,
leptin. So
mhm,
there's no magic of having higher protein in terms of weight loss, but you just want to have enough. And sometimes I put more in because it does help it helps compliance. It helps you stick to what you're doing. And then what we're
mhm,
doing now with Trifle Ladies, we're reducing it now
mhm.
because long term, we don't know long term what the benefits are or whether there's any consequences of having high protein. So we never want excess. We need enough, but sometimes we play around with a bit more.
Because the social media at the moment and the whole menopause conversation, they'd quite like for us to believe that all we need to do is add lots more protein into our diet, and then that's all you need to do for a menopause diet, which is absolute rubbish, isn't it? We just need enough.
Yeah, yeah. We just need a
Yeah.
and in fact, for those people who have had cancer, there are some concerns about having excess protein.
Yeah.
So we don't want to have excess, and there's no benefits to having excess. It's quite an expensive part of the plate. And it's because it's quite filling, the risk then is that you're not having that top half of the plate, the fruits and the vegetables. And that's the bit that's really going to work its magic. So we need enough protein, we need a nice variety of protein, and we need enough, but we don't need excess. Maybe in the short term, that's it.
In the show notes for anyone listening or watching back, I'm going to share the recommendations from the World Cancer Research Fund, which include meat and the cooked amount of meat. Can you just clarify that? Is that cooked weight for meat? What was the cooked weight for meat?
The cooked weight is, I'm going to say it's 500. The raw weight is 500 to 750.
Yeah, okay. And I'm going to share those recommendations so you can all look them up at home.
What I can also give you as well is I have just a sheet with how much protein is in the sort of servings that you're likely to have. Because I
That's
think
great.
we've got no
Yeah.
idea when we look at a meal.
No.
Exactly. You know, so for example, let's say you have yogurt for breakfast and you're like, well, that's good protein. It's only good protein if you have enough.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an idea of how, first of all, you work out how much you need per day. Now, I would very much recommend you certainly have enough at breakfast, because for many people that just helps to set them up for the day to have a higher protein breakfast. But otherwise, you can just divide it by your 3 meals. It's really easy to get enough protein. It really is. But what the risk is, when we start doing funny things with our diet, which is all about exclusions, and especially plant-based. All I'm advertising is to have lots of plants, but it's not exclusive. And if we're having, say, for example, a carrot and coriander soup for lunch, very, very low in protein. If you made your breakfast some oats, you made it with oat milk, you put some berries on it, you put a banana on it, you're thinking, this looks great. Very, very low in protein. So there's a few things we're thinking about when we're looking at a meal is, has it got the half of the plate? Has it got enough protein? Has it got enough fiber? And you get really good at knowing how to do that.
Yeah. And when you look at cancer survivors in general, hardly anyone is protein deficient, because people aren't really protein deficient in our world, are they? But what we are deficient in are very many minerals, vitamins, and also lots of fiber, right? So
Fiber, definitely. Yeah.
and I also want to check with you with this plate, with the 10 portions of fruit and vegetables a day, with complex, or those carbohydrates that you've mentioned, a portion of those and a portion of protein at every meal. Will I cover the intake I need as a postmenopausal cancer survivor in terms of my calcium intake, in terms of my vitamins and all of the others? Will I cover that if I eat like that?
Well, in an ideal world, yes.
Yeah.
Let's do fiber first. Now, if you manage the sort of 8 to 10 portions of fruit and veg a day, so not including the pulses yet, but just if you have 3 fruits, 6 vegetables, shockingly, that is only half of what you need a day.
In fiber.
Yeah. So we need 30 grams a day. That's roughly 15. It does depend on which ones you choose.
Yeah, of course.
That's roughly 15.
Mm-hmm.
Half a tin of chickpeas, for example, is another 7, 8. It sort of varies, but let's say it's another 7, 8. So that's why that part of the plate is so important in terms of fiber. It's such an easy way of sneaking up that fiber. So then we're up to what? We're up to, say, 22, 23. Now, the rest of the fiber is going to come from your complex carbs. So maybe it's the oats, maybe it's the bread, and it varies so much. But if you cut that part of the plate out, you are reducing a lot of the rest of your fiber. Yeah. With the exception of the pulses, you're not going to get any fiber from protein, which is why carnivore diet's not good for us, and why you've got to be careful any kind of ketogenic diet. You're just not going to get enough fiber. So the rest of the fiber, an easy hack to do that is with your nuts and seeds. So I was going to come on to that, the last bit of the plate, which is your healthy fats. That's another nice way of sneaking in some fiber. So the fats like olive oil, for example, or butter, no fiber in that, no protein, no fiber. But the nuts and seeds, it varies according to which ones you choose. But a serving size, which is the palm of your hand, so it's to be specific, it's an ounce, 28 grams, but it's the palm of your hand. Now, if you were to have the ounce of flax, which I'm quite keen on people having, that's 8 grams of fibre.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's, if you're having that each day, whether it's in your
Mm.
porridge or whether it's in a smoothie or on your yogurt, or even if you have just half of that, you are instantly boosting. But things like walnuts and almonds, they're going to be lower, but it's still another sort of 4 grams of fibre.
Mm.
So if you can't take your foot off the gas with that fruit and veg, because it is
Mm.
half of what you need.
Yeah.
And it's just really, I'm all every day I think, where am I going to sneak my pulses in? Is it lunch or is it my dinner?
Yeah.
Because it's just such a big part of your fibre.
Mm. So, with this plate in mind, this is a way of eating very much based on the Mediterranean diet, isn't it? It's very
Yeah,
much
yeah,
borrowed from there. With this way of eating in mind, my question is, I'm going to imagine being everyone at home now. And I know some people said to us in the beginning of the conversation, I'm really worried about my bone health going forward. So, with this plate in mind, with this very much, you've got the nourishing part, you've got your protein, adequate amounts, you've got your fiber, your vegetables. Will I be able to get enough to look after my bone health with a complete plate like that?
Okay, so what's really interesting with bone health,
Mm.
we have always just thought it was about calcium. Yeah, we've all grown up, you've got to have enough calcium,
Exactly.
or you've got to have more. I've now got the diagnosis of osteopenia, or I suppose I've got to have more. No, no, that isn't what's important for bone health. It's important to have enough, but more is not better. But what's actually really the best thing for your bone health, the number one thing is the exercise. Yeah. You can't out eat the lack of exercise. You have to, you put the pressure on the bones. But from a diet point of view, it's the Mediterranean diet. It's the whole diet. More
Mhm.
importantly, it's the fruit and veg. Now,
Mhm.
that's because what's actually starting to happen inside the bone with the lack of estrogen, guess what? Inflammation.
Mhm.
It's oxidative stress. So if we're going to look after our bone health, it's the same thing. We're reducing our oxidative stress, and we're going to do that with the fruits and the vegetables.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to have enough, which is why you're going to have maybe some dairy in the diet, or a dairy alternative like soy milk or tofu that's got sort of equivalent amounts of calcium.
Mm.
And then you've got your nuts and seeds, but actually it's the whole plate that when we keep eating that
Mm.
Mediterranean balanced plate, you should get everything you need. It will
Mm.
depend on your gut health and your ability to digest and absorb, and individual kind of genetic differences. But generally, yeah, you should be able to get enough.
Mm.
I just wanted to say about, was it Anne that mentioned about IBS?
Mhm. Yes, I think.
Yeah. So one of the ways, if Anne was to suddenly increase that part of the plate, and especially the lentils and beans, and some of you might have already experienced this, sometimes that can be quite uncomfortable, and that's often what puts people off healthy eating. You suddenly eat loads more fiber, which you think is good for you, but it's quite unpleasant. So there is a version of that same plate, the Mediterranean plate that I'm talking about, where you increase your fruits and vegetables, but not necessarily all of them. And so
Mm.
that's called the FODMAP diet.
Mm.
And that might be something you might want to look at in terms of still being able to eat well, to mop up, the inflammation, but not cause extra inflammation inside the gut.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. There are a few more questions about calcium, and what I want to share is so interesting because years ago I thought I'm going to cut out all meat,
Mm,
because I probably bought into the myth maybe that meat is bad for you after cancer. Anyway, I stopped eating all meat, all processed meat, which was good. I was raised in Austria, ate way too much salami, and we know processed meat is different to red meat, so
mm,
that's a good thing. But I also stopped eating other meats, and I didn't really replace it with other sources of protein. So now, with hindsight, looking back, I'm sure for me, there were times in my post-cancer diet where I was maybe under the protein I needed, because
mm,
I don't even know what I replaced it with. Like with these green soups that you just mentioned, there wasn't enough protein in those. And when I did my calcium tracker, I was also low in calcium. But when, after speaking to you, after I'd upped all of my intake of vegetables and fruit, I'm actually okay.
mm,
And so maybe people at home are thinking, but how do I know?
mm.
So with protein, you've given us the guidance of, was it 0.8 times your weight of how much protein you need a day. With calcium, the Royal Society for Osteoporosis has a calcium tracker where you can put in what you eat in a day. And I'm going to share that with all of you later
Mm.
and in the show notes. And it might be a really helpful exercise if you're still concerned or if you want to know, because it's really helpful. You can put in what you eat on average, how much you drink, all the milk, everything you do. And it gives you whether you consume enough calcium. And it might be a helpful exercise if that is your focus. Because do people want to know, how do I know, right? It's a very normal question.
Yeah. And it's really hard to answer specific.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's not something I add up. I give examples
Yeah.
of how to easily meet that in the day with very small amounts of dairy. And then
Yes.
kind of the fish alternative. So obviously a can of small sardines with the bones is huge amounts of calcium.
Yes.
But what becomes complicated there, and this is why I try not to get people doing it, is because whilst it might have a certain amount, is we don't know about bioavailability.
Mm.
So we've got a certain amount of calcium, for example, in the green leafy veg, but whether we can absorb that, we
The
don't.
same way. Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think calcium is one of those areas where if you are eating a balanced diet, if you are excluding dairy, just make sure that where you are putting in the alternative, it is calcium enriched. But you
Mm.
certainly don't need to have excess levels. So
Mm.
it's quite easy to eat enough. And also for many of us, where depending on where we live, we are getting huge amounts of calcium from our water,
Ah,
mm,
yeah.
which we
So
don't have yet when we're looking at
with
diets.
dairy, because you just mentioned that, some of us will be of the generation that have wanted to lose weight all of our lives because skinny was always better than strong. I know this is something that is changing slowly. And a lady, Emma, is just saying she's actually taken part in the Weight Watchers program, and they do always or have always encouraged 0% fat with yogurts because you
Yeah.
mentioned dairy. Is that a recommendation of yours?
Yeah. It's difficult to answer, but from a calcium point of view, it makes no difference. So actually, there is slightly more calcium in the low fat versions. Not huge amounts, but slightly more. So it won't be detrimental in terms of calcium.
Okay.
It's a way of decreasing some of your calories, which is what you do need to do if you're looking to lose some weight. There's no getting away from that. So yeah, whether it's low fat doesn't, and actually for many people, the best diet going forwards is this high fiber Mediterranean diet. And I think what people sometimes miss about the Mediterranean diet and for cancer prevention going forward is it's relatively low in fat.
Mm.
So actually, sometimes I say to people, actually, don't always choose. If you're going to use your, for example, your yogurt to get enough protein in, you don't want to have too much fat then. So sometimes I go for the lower fat option. As long as it's not a flavored version, it won't have sugar in it.
Mm. And Julie, how does this wholesome Mediterranean way of eating, how does this have a positive impact on our mood and blood sugars? Because we touched on that before. That was a real concern for many: mood swings, irritability, but also the fatigue. How can that even help? I can get my head around how it can help with bones, with the calcium, with the protein for muscles. I get all of that. How could
So,
it have a
yeah.
positive impact on mood?
So when it comes to mood, the same thing is happening. One of the causal factors is inflammation. So when you start to reduce the inflammation, actually, you improve brain health.
Mm.
So yeah, it's the same mechanism of action. And I know this firsthand because one of my clinics is what is looking at mental health. So,
Mm.
and then in terms of the blood sugar, when you so if you imagine that you've got your baseline of blood sugar. Okay, so when you eat, what you're looking to do is provide the body with some food that you can turn into energy. So that's the carbohydrate part of the meal. You're going to break that down and turn it into energy. So when you eat a meal, let's say you have some porridge for breakfast, you are looking to have a rise in blood sugar. Yeah, you need that because you are then going to release some insulin, put all of that sugar into your cells. And inside your cells, you've got millions of mitochondria, and they will turn that sugar, that glucose, into energy. So then your blood sugar falls again. Then you're going to have another meal. It's lunch. You're going to have some soup and a roll or something. Blood sugar's going to rise. You're going to put all of that into your cells. Blood sugar's going to fall. So throughout the day, you are looking to have, think of it as the baby ride at the fun fair. Yeah. Slow and steady. It's like the teacups. Yeah. It's gentle. Yeah. But what many of us do with diet and with the loss of insulin sensitivity and just the way we eat now, many of us, whether it's from comfort eating, whether it's because of stress, maybe it's lack of time, we've got in the habit of more processed foods. Many of our meals, especially when you combine it with stress, we get a much sharper rise in blood sugar. Yeah, and that might be because of too many carbs, or it might be carbs and stress and a coffee. It's multifactorial, but when you have a sharp rise in blood sugar, your body will release a lot of insulin to bring that down because it doesn't want high blood sugar. So you will then crash down. Now, you don't just feel bad when you hit the bottom, you feel bad all the way down. That's what you've got to bear in mind. When you are hitting the bottom of that curve, it is much, much harder to regulate your emotions. So not only could you start feeling weak and tired, and start to feel a bit shaky, you will we know from research that you will feel more irritable, more angry. So the Mediterranean diet has a really good impact on keeping the blood sugar more like this. Whereas the more we eat processed, the more we eat too much sugar, you're going to have more of this. And then every time you up there it feels okay. Some people find that don't feel good after an excess of sugar, but the problem is the lows. And that's compounded with the fact that when we hit a low, we don't think, oh, I'm going to make myself a nice kale salad, or a nice sardines on toast, do we? We're like, I need to get out of this situation now because real life is happening and we're out and about. So we don't generally get healthy foods. It's something in a packet. All that does is serve to bring us back up, often too quick again. So it's kind of just this, we get caught in that roller coaster. Yeah. And that is when not only are we increasing inflammation with that diet, we aren't providing the anti-inflammatory foods. And then at the same time, when we're doing that, it's harder to produce the hormones that we need, the dopamine and serotonin, and we just can't regulate emotions at the bottom.
Because it's another sort of, maybe last year there was a bit of a hype about everyone wearing glucose monitors and the glucose goddess being extremely popular, and people really worried about eating a banana for that glucose spike, right? Whereas when you explain it, of course, this is how the body functions. We couldn't live without that glucose.
We don't want the flat line. It's not.
No.
Yeah. No.
It's a normal bodily function.
Yeah, sorry, you can help yourself you never want that. You can have the odd one, Christmas Day and whatever. We're aiming for that. And we can do that by eating all the foods, the bananas and the fruits. But, the phrase that she used to have was put some clothes on your carbs. Still rings true. Yeah. So that's why you balance the plate. You have your fruits and vegetables. You have a certain amount of starch. You have that by having the protein with the starch and a small amount of fat, you can soften that.
Yeah. So Emily had a really lovely homemade chickpea and spinach curry for lunch with onions and tomatoes. Would that count as any of her, 4 portions of vegetables? If you had that in a whole bowl, what do you reckon?
Yeah, it sounds wonderful. When I make a soup, I think a good practice is most dinners, I think, serve 4. So when I'm making a soup that serves 4, for example, if I'm say it's chickpea, is it chickpea soup? She said,
yeah, chickpea curry she made with pea, spinach, tomatoes, onions.
I always think, right, this soup is going to serve 4. So what do I want in my quarter? Yeah. So I make sure I put 2 tins of chickpeas. I think most recipes would say tin of chickpeas, double it. I want to have half a tin in my portion. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So 2 tins. Yeah. Same if I'm making a chili. Yeah. Recipes always say 1 tin of kidney beans. No, double it. And that's so cheap to do anyway. Yeah. So that you're serving, you've got that half a tin, 8 grams of fibre. Yeah. And also, if it's a vegetarian dinner, that's your protein. So it's the same protein as fibre in pulses. So that quarter of a half a tin, is going to be roughly 8 grams of protein. Now, in terms of whether you've had your 3 servings at lunch of vegetables. It depends on how much you put in there. So I
Mhm.
always aim to put in, God, I've forgotten the amounts. I always think, well, I want to have 3 lots of 80 grams. So I times that by 4. And I've forgotten the number. I usually know it off by heart, but
Yeah,
so when
yeah.
all my soup recipes, I make sure that there is enough to be in my portion 3 servings. Now, it is a big bowl of soup. It's not a half a cup of the sort of the bought soups, which is why if you look at any of the soups that you buy, it will say counts as one of your 5 a day. And it's such a small amount. So this is a much more hearty bowl of soup. So in terms of whether her bowl had enough, it might depend on how big a bowl
Yeah.
she had.
Mm.
But you don't need to worry about whether it's too many calories, because if the bulk of that is vegetables, you know it's not many calories, but it's very
Mm.
filling and all the fiber. But just that bowl of soup might not be enough protein, but it depends on how much she needs, as I don't know how big she is.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the other 2 meals were. We've got to
Yeah.
always think, how have I fed this body today?
Mm. Mm. And when you make smoothies, for example,
Mm.
and you put because whole fruits are a good way to put into smoothies, aren't
Yes,
they? Or
yes.
is there a worry about that sugar spike? Is there a worry that it might actually spike too much? Or
No, there are people will worry about it, but no, actually, there's evidence to say, especially if you are blending berries, there's something about the pips, the fat inside the pips, that actually softens the blood sugar spike. But
okay.
it depends on whether you buy a smoothie out or whether you make your own. So if you make your own, you are in control. It's no more than 150 milliliters of a pure juice. And I would
Mm.
always go for something like an orange juice that's nice and high in vitamin C, which is needed when we're quite stressed. And then you can put in, frozen berries, for example. What's wonderful about those is you're going to obviously blend the pips. You've got in a bag of frozen berries, you've got 5 different varieties. So you're getting a
Mm.
lot of fiber, but you're also getting that diversity of fiber. And I'm a big fan of frozen berries because they are low in sugar, but they are also very, very high in polyphenols. And it's the polyphenols that you're going to get from the berries. You would get it from flax, you would get it from coffee, many other foods in that cleansing half. But that's your best defense against those aches and pains.
Mm.
And green tea, black tea, like a builder's
Mm.
tea, any kind of tea is high in polyphenols.
Mm.
And now I've forgotten the question.
Mm. No, that's fine about the smoothies and the sugar content.
So smoothies,
Mm.
so again, don't have the
Mm.
same thing every day, because might get bored. So you could put in, for example, 150 milliliters of apple juice, 80 grams of berries, and a small banana. That might make it more delicious for you.
Mm. And if we eat with this Mediterranean plate in mind,
Mm.
uh, will it, like you said in the beginning, it's quite quick for people to see an improvement in symptoms. We
Yes.
haven't talked about what you then can't eat. So can I have a snack bar in the afternoon that is a Snickers or something? Or does it
Oh, that's a
matter
really
then
good
even?
question. That's a
Yeah.
really good question, because what I would always say to people is, don't think about what you can't have. Okay. That will
Mm.
make you miserable. But also, I kind of like the crowd out approach. Now, if if you have that little list of what you try it for a few days as a challenge, see how much room you've got left for a Mars bar. You will be so full up from the fiber that you're there. And if you get enough protein, there's a really good chance you're not looking. So when it comes to having some sugar in
Mm.
our diet, you sometimes ask yourself, do the stop technique and say, what is it I want here? Am I ravenously hungry? In which
Mm.
case, it's not that you can't have the Mars bar. Think to yourself, what have I not had that's making me so hungry? Or what did I have that maybe spiked my blood sugar? So
Mm.
fix the base of your diet first so that you can allow for some of these treats.
Mm.
So sugar is absolutely allowed, but it depends on what you like, and it always comes down to portion size.
Yeah. I I never that never clicked with me. I always forgot to listen to that. I always thought it's all or nothing. And that's just
Yeah, it's
not
normal.
true, isn't it? It's so normal.
Yeah,
And I know you always say, oh, you're just like everyone I see in my practice. And it's really about the portion size, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
And because you say about this stop technique, a lady just said for everyone with IBS, but I think this goes true for everyone, making sure you relax before eating, taking a few breaths and slowing down, because feeling stress can inhibit our digestion. But also
Yeah.
it's that sort of mindful moment, isn't it? And I
Yeah.
do really believe for myself what's worked the best over the last 10 years is not what I ate, it's to plan for how I eat. That was for me the biggest change in really transforming my diet. And if I failed to plan, I was actually planning to fail. You cannot accept or expect to feel better to make any changes just by going to the shops, cooking differently, eating differently. It doesn't happen like that. It does take planning, which is when people come to you, you help them plan, don't you? And so, of
The
course,
planning is the hardest bit, I think.
that's the hardest bit. Yeah.
It is, yeah. On the subject of sugar, because this is really, really key for menopause symptoms. So I'm definitely allowing sugar. It's the research is saying that, not me. um,
Mm.
so you can have kind of 25, maybe 30 grams of sugar a day. So that's 6 teaspoons. Yeah. It's not your goal. It's definitely not what you're aiming for. But I think it's really nice to know that actually, if I have that amount, I am not going to cause my cancer to come back. Because for any one of you, we have no idea what role diet played for you. We don't know. So therefore, we don't know what role it's going to play in a recurrence. So I think it's really important to think, how does sugar make me feel? Now, in the moment, sugar is wonderful. Of course it is. But in terms of menopause, I think it's one of your biggest levers, along with the fruit and veg. So rather than saying I can't have any, just try and have the smallest amount possible until you've got your symptoms under control. And then you can play around with it and see, actually, when I have this much, how do I feel? Because sugar later in the day will definitely disrupt your sleep. I'll
Yeah.
say that hand on heart. Yeah.
Mhm.
Even if you think you sleep, you won't sleep as well if you're having more sugar later in the evening. And that's usually when we want it, because that's when we sit down and relax.
Of course.
That's when we suddenly realize, oh, I just need a little something. So
Yes.
yeah, it's not that you can't have it. It's not that you're never going to have it again. It's one of your tools to say, if
Mm.
I just cut this out for a little bit, do I feel any better? And then it
Yeah.
becomes whether you choose to have it or not.
Yeah. With the information that we have now talked about, I want to know from everyone at home how you're going to plan to set yourself up for a January or for a February or for any month when you're listening to this so that you feel you're taking some positive actions, because we all have different starting points. So please go into the chat and let me know and think of what you could do for yourself. Or maybe you're thinking, actually, I love it. This information has reassured me that I'm totally on the right track. I don't need to make big changes. I don't want to make big changes. And that's wonderful as well. But when Anna said at the very beginning of the conversation, she had a lot of sugary sweets and minced pies and things over the last few weeks. Perhaps she's thinking, I want to eat less of that. So is it a matter of, I'm not going to buy it? I'm not going to buy what I don't want to eat. I think to me, that was always a rule that was great. And yes, you can go out in the evening and put your coat on and go to the shops. But sometimes when I just want to go through my cupboards and I don't have anything but dried fruit and nuts, for example, I'm a little bit annoyed. But it's what I will have because I want that quick. I want to munch on something. So someone is saying, I will be looking into more protein breakfast recipes. You see, I love this because this isn't, I'm going to add lots more protein to everywhere. This is very focused. This is looking at your breakfasts. This is perhaps you've identified that breakfast is the hardest meal out of the three meals for yourself to add protein. And so with that clear focus, 5 new recipes and maybe cooking 1 new recipe a week is a great starting point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Someone is saying this has been amazing, so easy and clear. I'm increasing my fruit and veg as a priority to begin with. Thanks so much. That's great. Anna, I know you're not a child and I know you're not a teenager. With Julie and I both have teenagers at the moment. And when they were children, we sent them out to the shop and we said, buy a new fruit you haven't treated yourself with and add that, because I often just buy the same old fruit and veg because I'm lazy and I'm a creature of habits. But when I make an effort, it's like I buy kiwis, I buy pomegranates. There's so many lovely fruits that feel like a treat. To me, it's a real treat when I do that. So maybe just feel like you're really treating yourself, which is a lovely way.
Yeah, something I often suggest to people is don't ask yourself, what do you fancy? Because the answer will always, for me, would always be croissant. So, so just make it anyway. So say, for example, it's, you want a snack. What do I fancy? Let's say I fancy a bag of crisps, right? So rather than saying I'm not going to have bag of crisps and have that whole, oh, I should have it, I shouldn't have it, I want it, stop the dialogue. Just say, okay, what I'm going to do is chop up a carrot, going to get a little bit of hummus out, going to put 3 walnuts on my plate, a few grapes, make yourself a little buffet, tiny little buffet. Okay. Don't ask yourself, do you want it? Because the answer is probably no. Okay. Make it and start it, and give yourself permission halfway through to say, no, this is horrid. It's not what I need today. Because 9 times out of 10, once you start, you're like, oh God, I forgot how nice they are. It's a bit like
Yeah.
fruit. We forget to eat fruit, half of it. When it's chopped up all nice, we're like, oh my God, this is delicious. And
Mm.
when people come on the workshops, the food is amazing, and they're like, oh, I love eating healthy. I just don't do it. So
Yeah.
don't ask if you want it.
And I know you and I always get the same questions. How can I eat for my bones? How can I eat for my brain? But it's so reassuring to know we're after a lifestyle of eating that is going to give us the biggest benefit. Emma is saying she's followed your advice since October and she feels better now than before cancer. Thank you, Julie.
That's
Which is
wonderful.
really lovely. But also, Emma, I want to say well done to you,
Mm.
because it's one thing turning up here and it's one thing writing lots of notes and then never looking at your notepad again. What you have done is taken action, and you have used that knowledge and you've made it practical for yourself. And you've obviously implemented it enough, Emma, for you to receive and reap a benefit. So all I think you need to now show up for yourself and really praise yourself, and with a big pat on the back, Emma, because the hardest thing is to make sustainable changes to reap those benefits. So incredible. Like, we are loving, I'm loving bringing Julie to you and all of that advice, but I know how hard it is to put it into practice. So well done.
And at the hardest
Some
time of year.
hardest time of year. Someone is put it wanting recipes to incorporate the principles here to make it practical. That's great. I want a plan. Um, but are there any books? Eating regularly is my biggest problem. We haven't got time, but I think we need to do a part 2 on eating regularly, eating within a time window. Julie needs to write her book, which is something we need to just get her to do. But Kim, for you, for now, Julie, are there any other books with lovely recipes that you could recommend?
Mm.
Um, mm.
I'm a really big fan of Melissa Hemsley.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Her books are fantastic. They do all of this. They do everything that I want.
Brilliant. So that's lovely, Kim. Until Julie's book comes out, Melissa Hemsley, someone is going to reduce fat yogurt for better protein. Someone is eating very little sugar but having trouble with sleeping through the night. So we'll definitely try cutting out sugar after lunch, afternoon. Thank you for the tip. And I think what's so important to remember is some of those dietary changes may or may not help. If you're on other drugs like aromatase inhibitors, tamoxifen, surgically induced menopause, we're not going to be able to eat all of our symptoms better. There will be other factors and you might need other treatments, but it's a wonderful support, and it's a great tool that we can't underestimate enough. Someone did the FODMAP diet that you mentioned earlier, Julie. And she will look into using more seeds and nuts to increase protein intake, especially at breakfast, as I usually just have porridge made with water. Oh my gosh, there are so many ways in which you could pimp up that porridge. Nuts and seeds and some dried fruits and maybe some of those frozen berries and maybe a little dollop of kefir on top for some of those really fermented, lovely. Lots of lovely messages. Carolyn says, thank you so much for this. I could listen for Julie for hours, so could I. I'm trying to focus on getting the sugar intake down, as it's the one thing I struggle with. She's a bit of a trifle lady. Well, Carolyn, you're not alone. Emma said, so informative. I'm going to go back to my planning meals, which definitely helps. I think so too. Much better than restricting. Someone is looking at creative types for their fruit and vegetables. I like that. She's still having concerns about including enough protein in your vegan diet. I think that's a genuine concern. And I wonder whether you can do a little bit of tracking there on something like, those My Fitness Pal or something. for a few
Yeah,
days?
my net diary is quite good for doing that, I think. But
Oh, yeah.
if you are vegan, it is much harder. Depending on how much you need, it can be a lot harder. And that's where I am quite a big fan of sometimes just adding a bit of protein powder into a smoothie, because
Mm.
then you can still keep all your other meals the same, but you can add 30, 40 grams of protein in quite an
Yeah.
easy way. Yeah. So I
Yeah. And Kim is saying, are we covering fats? That will have to come in part two because we're way over and we've got to let Julie go. And we're going to just talk about everything in more detail. Um, and Kim, yes, you can have the links for tracking. What was it that you had suggested that you liked?
I use my net diary. I
My
think it's
Net's
similar to My
diary.
Fitness Pal. Yeah, my
Perfect.
net diary is nice. I just find it user friendly.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Julie, that was a great start back for everyone. It's given me the motivation to plan a little bit more. Um, thank you so, so much. Thank you,
It's
everyone,
been
for
lovely to be
joining.
here. My first day back, I've enjoyed it.
What wonderful feedback we have received. I love it when people come back month after month to our workshops and when they tell us that they've implemented some of the strategies our experts recommend and that they've had a really positive impact on their lives. So well done, Emma, and well done, everyone else. Make this practical. Come up with a little to-do list, plan for yourself, whether that's adding more vegetables or having less sugar, whatever it might be, or figuring out whether you eat enough protein. Have a clear goal of what you want to do. Don't think you have to overhaul your whole diet in one go. Start small and start by having a little plan and by planning it in. Also check out the resources. I'm going to add all of the resources to the World Cancer Research Fund, all of their recommendations and everything in the show notes here. Good luck with implementing all of the changes if you want to implement any, and don't forget to reward yourself perhaps at the end of the week when you've had a couple of extra portions of vegetables or whatever it might be that you're doing. Small steps and consistent steps go a really long way, so be proud when you've implemented any. I'll see you on next week's episode. Bye bye.